severely disrupted, this is proved to be very difficult. But we will continue to monitor the situation.
Well, let's take a step back. Let's speak to Seth Frantzman, a Middle East author and analyst, an adjunct fellow at the think tank, the Foundation for Defence Democracy. Seth, thanks for joining us here on the programme. Let's take a step back from everything we've been seeing over the last few days to look at the broader Israeli strategy. Your assessment of where we are almost 6 weeks in.
Well, Israel spent several weeks conducting air campaign operations, kind of similar to what the United States did in Iraq in the first Gulf War in the 90s. And then what they did, a ground offensive, which has kind of cut the Gaza Strip in two. And now they've moved around so that the two sides of the kind of pincer movement has taken Gaza Harbor, west of Gaza City. They've basically taken all the, let's say, suburban areas around Gaza City. And the question now is, whether or not they'll proceed into the densely part of the old part of Gaza City, or whether, as we've heard, whether they'll start to concentrate in the south. They have not found most of the Hamas leadership. There are 240 hostages still. I think they have two bodies are recovered today. It looks like more will be probably recovered. And the Shifa hospital investigation looks to be ongoing. So there's a lot of question marks about, what comes next. There's 3 Israeli divisions at least operating there. They've certainly defeated most of the Hamas fighters they've run into. They've said they're entering now a new phase. I guess the question is where that phase goes.
You talked about the density of the population right in the centre of Gaza City. I mean, the damage across the north of Gaza is colossal. We've seen the pictures. You even had Benjamin Netanyahu say in that CBS interview that they haven't been successful minimising civilian casualties. In terms of the future of the operation, is there anything different they can actually do to avoid just more casualties upon casualties?
Well, I think if we look actually at the first month of the campaign, the claim numbers of casualties were higher in the first few weeks when it was primarily an air campaign. Now, when they've encouraged most of the people in northern Gaza, which I guess is more than 1 million people, to leave to the south, I think a lot of them have left. And in lots of the neighborhoods, what we're seeing is infantry and armored units moving very slowly, street by street, backed up with artillery and Air Force. I was down in the south this week, actually, with an artillery unit. And what they do is they have a lot of intelligence they use, using, what you'd imagine with smartphones and computers and everything, to plot what's happening, to try to keep track of where civilians are. They do a lot of work to try to avoid, I think, civilian casualties. And I think that is easier once they're actually close in on the ground. They try to prevent any friction with civilians, and they try to make sure also the soldiers don't have much friction actually with enemy forces.
What do you anticipate in terms of... Take a sip of water and I'll ask you a question. What do you anticipate in terms of the military strategy in the south? I don't know if you heard our former IDF commander saying that he anticipated moving further south, but not necessarily allowing people back to the north because their operations continue even there. So how do you see it in terms of progressing in the south, where all those people now are?
It would seem that would be a very difficult hurdle, considering the fact that the IDF has preferred not to allow or have civilians in the rear, which what I mean is if you compare it, for instance, to the 2003 invasion of Iraq, U.S. forces just drove through Iraqi cities and civilians were filtrated through. There wasn't a question of whether or not civilians would just stay on. So the current campaign has been designed to move them out and then encounter Hamas. What's left would be Hamas. So it would seem to be difficult in terms of the doctrine to then go into the south as well. Of course, Israel's stated goals is that they want all of the hostages back and they want to eliminate the Hamas leadership. So
the difficulty, though, of the difficulty what you've just said, though, is potentially quite a few of the Hamas fighters may have gone south, and the same is true of the hostages. Right.
Well, I think if they find that out, that will be a very difficult thing for Israel to bear, because we've already started to see some of the hostages being recovered, and I think the feeling that any Hamas members got away would be problematic for the Israeli public. I think it is clear also Israel has tried to move cautiously and slowly, and that, of course, means sometimes people do get away, because if you're not going to do some sort of helicopter raid into the middle of a place to try to capture people like like the United States did in, I think it was in Somalia back in the 90s, then you have trouble capturing them. So I think going into the South is going to be a very difficult issue, and it's not clear to me how they would filtrate the people back to the North. And even if that's what the goal will be, maybe the goal is just to slowly grind down what's left of Gaza City to see if they can find, because probably some Hamas leaders and some hostages probably obviously are there, because they found bodies next to Shifa Hospital. So there are some hostages there.
The final quick question, we've only got about a minute left. In terms of Hamas's tactics so far, is it the classic sort of guerrilla tactics? They appear from wherever it is, fight for a bit and then disappear?
I think actually, interestingly enough, Hamas tried to actually fight it out for the first week or so. Israel eliminated a lot of anti-tank rocket fire teams, a lot of RPG teams, and we saw that because there was some anti-tank fire that destroyed at least one APC. So actually, Hamas tried to resist for a while and tried to fight, and I think they were vanquished under immense firepower. And it's unclear to me how many more fighters they actually have in the north that are able to continue doing that.
Seth Frantzman, we have to leave it there, but thank you so much for your time and thanks for that assessment.